As private lenders, there are several ways to value commercial real estate: replacement value, income approach, and sales approach. I'm going to go through the way that we do it internally to keep it super easy and flexible for us and our clients. So you probably heard of income approach, cap rates, net operating income, and things like that. That's typically the traditional way that banks and institutions underwrite and value commercial real estate. Now that does take a play when we underwrite as well, but we more look on the sales approach. But let me real quick back up on the income approach and the importance of it. So obviously you take the gross income of the building, of what it generates, you back out the expenses, and you have the NOI, the net operating income. You determine what opinionated cap rate is in that area, and you can back into what the property value is. Now this is a great way to potentially do it as a bank, to determine what the actual value is, or what the value could be based on pro forma financials, with new rents in place or rent additions in place. I'm not stating that this isn't a good way to value real estate, but we like to use the sales approach, where we use sales comparisons and comparables of like kind buildings, if you're able to gather those, just because, as a lender, we want to know what the fire sale value is. What happens to this property if it has to trade or close or get sold quickly? What can we sell it for? And, what ends up happening is most of these loans are short-term to begin with, right? So when we do our commercial loans, we don't do any constructions loans. We don't do any renovation funds. We don't use the after repair value like we do on a residential piece of property. We care about the as-is value of the commercial real estate. That's what we care about. That value can change depending on the situation, but if you're using income approach stuff, that value can vary a lot. We've always felt that on the sales approach, the resale comparable approach, that is very simple. And I know, some of the things that I might say might sound kind of funky. I'll give you an example of something that might sound funky. If the building has a tenant in it, or if the building is vacant, the as-is value sometimes might be the same. Now, ideally, you always want to lend on buildings that are operational, that have income coming in, that have long-term tenants, but that's not always reasonable. And let's be honest, a building can have a tenant in place, and then that tenant can move out, and now you're stuck with a vacant building, and that's common. So you got to determine what the value of that building is going to be, or is not going to be, is throughout the whole term of your loan, right? They might have a long-term tenant in there, but they might have a short-term tenant in there. It might be vacant. They might be owner operating that building. All that stuff's good. All that stuff's taken in consideration, but got to kind of just look outside the box and say, what will this property trade for quickly if I took back this property? Because again, we're lenders. We're not owners of real estate. If you're looking to do the loan-to-own game, that's fine. That's a simple formula. How much are you willing to pay for the property? Then lend, 90% of that, right? That's easy. This is to protect lenders so they don't have to take back properties and they'll sell quickly and fire sale if the deal goes into default. So typically we'll lend 50% as is value. Take after repair value out because there's no after repair value. 50% to 65% of the as is value. We try to be as close to 50 as possible, but that does depend on the project. Is it multifamily? Is it retail? Is it industrial? Is it office? Let's be honest, commercial office is a tough asset class right now. We still lend on commercial office, but banks don't really want to lend on commercial office. So they have professional office, I should say, when I say commercial office. So that extra strategy might be tough. Now, on the other side, a bank really likes medical office, because what's the difference between a medical office or a business office, I should say? Medical office, typically you sign much longer term leases. If you're in this, like a business park, or probably where your office is, or certainly where our office is, these are just professional offices. These tenants are signing leases between 1, 2 to 5 years. Obviously the landlord would love for them to sign longer term leases, but they're not going to. They're not sure where their business is going to be. So you're dealing with just like smaller financial commercial operators on stuff like that. So banks have a very, very hard time lending on that. That'll go to the exit strategy here that I'm going to talk about in a second. So typically it's 50 to 65%. They're shorter term loans, right? Like you probably don't want your money tied up and guaranteed tied up for a long period of time, right? You want 1 year loans. There's a huge demand and need for small balance commercial loans. There just is. A lot of banks don't want to mess with them. The due diligence costs are too expensive to go to a bank or an institution for some of these real estate investors. And, they're willing to pay, 13% rate, give or take 11, 12, 13, 14, 15% for a smaller short-term bridge loan just to get into the next step where they refinance with a bank or they refinance with an SBA loan. So due diligence we typically do we do look at financials. And obviously if the building's operational with tenants in there, that's great. I mean, get a profit and loss, get a balance sheet, potentially get a tax return if you think that'll be useful, and even pro forma data of what's going to happen down the road with that building. If you're lending on a vacant building and then they put tenants in there and they have decent sized leases, that's great. For the most part, that the value of the property might increase while you're in there. So get rent rolls, get leases. The longer term leases, the better. That being said, a lot of the buildings that we do are still vacant buildings, and we're comfortable with it because I'm lending at 50% of the as-is value on that. And if it's a purchase, the borrower's bringing 50% to the table, and that's how it's structured. We do get a valuation. We use a company called Lender Consulting Services, LCS. If you need a connection to that, comment below this video or comment in the podcast, and I'm happy to share you my contact with there. A typical valuation, MAI appraisals or anything like that, I mean, those could take $10,000, $15,000 in months to get done. A valuation might only cost $1,000 to get in and out of that thing, and that serves our purpose. Also environmentals. For small balance types of stuff, a lot of them can't absorb a full phase 1 for phase 2 environmental. $2,500 for a full phase 1, endless amount of money. Who knows? $15,000 plus for a phase 2. If it gets to that, the numbers just aren't going to work. So what we'll do is we'll order like a desk review environmental, costs $500. Takes 3 or 4 days. Super, super simple. Determines if there's any red flags, right? If it's a gas station, we're probably not going to do it. Or they'll have to, do significantly more due diligence. Typically, it'll determine if there's any potential environmental issues. And if there are, then we will order a phase 1 if it makes sense. A lot of times they're not, but we do have that in the file because we do think that's important. Because if there's real environmental issues, you have an issue. You might never want to foreclose on that property because then you're the owner and it's at risk. Or environmental issues, they might not be able to get a bank refinance. So it's important to know what you're up against. And sometimes we'll get zoning reports, not often, but every once in a while we'll get zoning reports if we're concerned that they're operating the commercial building as they legally should be. So we do underwrite these loans just like residential loans. Obviously, collateral is the most important thing, right? Collateral is very important. Characteristics of the borrower, their communications are important. Capacity to execute. Do they have the capacity even to do this project? Can they make the monthly payments? Do they have a clear exit strategy? Do they have the capacity to perform? That's important. And then credit score. Credit score arguably is a lot more important on commercial assets than residential. I mean, we still do require good credit on all of our borrowers, but what happens on a commercial property? Not many commercial property owners are buying and flipping a commercial asset in a few months. Typically, they're refinancing them to keep it as a long-term play. And they need a bank loan. You have to have good credit to get a bank or an institution loan. So make sure you're pulling their credit so you know that they have an exit strategy, a clear exit strategy to do so. Most bank loans are full doc, right? Like a bank's typically not going to lend on a commercial assets that's not supporting the debt of the building, right? So they're looking at the debt service coverage and they're going to look at the financials to make sure that they can perform on this deal. So that's how we lend on commercial properties. If you have any questions related to this topic or any other topic related to private lending at all, just comment below this video. You can always find us at hardmoneymastermind.com. That's our private community, free private community for other hard money and private lenders all over the country. But we do put out videos regularly on YouTube and on our podcast, Private Lenders Podcast. That's another good way to do that. But the commercial lending on actual commercial properties is a good niche for private lenders and hard money lenders. And there's a huge demand for small balance commercial loans. There is when the real estate market's good, when the real estate market's bad, when rates are high, rates are low. Over the last 16 going on 17 years of us being in business, that's always been a really, really good niche for us. And again, it's not a huge part of our portfolio, but we're doing multiple deals per month in the small balance commercial space. You just got to make sure you're conservative. You can wrap your brain around the building and the asset. And again, income approach is definitely something that you want to look at, but sales approach, really determining what comparables are, help out a lot. And if all else fails and you think you're comfortable with it, but you're just not sure, just lower your leverage, right? Just because you tell real estate investors that you typically lend up to 65%, you could lend 50% or 40% or 30% or 10%, whatever you're comfortable with. Go with that. Any questions related to this topic or another one, my name is Jason at hardmoneybankers.com, and just comment below this video and I'm happy to help.